And we're back! Greetings everyone, this is Lucian Vâlsan broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer James Huff sitting in the background making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the US. Greetings, Mr. Gunnarsson. Long time no hear.
Yeah, we're finally back after long hiatus. What
Yeah,
has it
it's
been, like 6 weeks, something like that?
not really that much. 1 month and 3 and 4 days. So yeah,
Maybe 5
essentially
weeks.
4 weeks or 5 weeks. On April 8th, we had our last show. And when you think about it, there will be even more hiatuses very soon because in mid-June I'm going again to Ukraine on a tour this time, and then it's ICMI when again I'll be out. So yeah, it's usually when it's warm I'm traveling. When it's very freaking cold outside, I'm definitely almost always inside.
Sounds very reasonable.
Yep, especially in Ukraine, you don't want to go there during the winter. I made this mistake in
Yeah.
January, and I was very, very close to dying from a bad cold. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but still. So yeah, there's no way we can cover the last month. So essentially, we've just picked what's the most outrageous thing, or uh, what basically what has fallen back from the tree whilst we're out, essentially.
Yep.
All right. Well, we'll get to bitch and complain because we've missed so much. So let's start with the first one, coming from the Daily Mail. Mothers don't have stronger bonds with their children than fathers. From the marketplace to the workplace, it is mothers who are still perceived as having that special bond with their children. This is compounded by advertising and the widely held expectation that it will be the mothers who take parental leave. But in a rapidly changing society, is there really any reason to assume that mothers are any more suited to take care of their children than fathers? Some will argue that a superior maternal instinct is part of a woman's biology. But do pregnancy, hormones, or parenting experiences really create a stronger bond? Let's take a look at the scientific evidence. Some scholars argue that the relationship between parents and children can begin before birth. They claim that such a antenatal bonding feeling connecting to the unborn baby is an important predictor of the infant-mother relationship. However, the actual evidence linking feelings about the baby during pregnancy with postnatal behavior is inconsistent, so it's not clear how or even if such feelings influence later relationships. But even if it is shown to be the case, another problem is that most of the research in this area has been conducted with mothers. We are now also starting to understand that fathers develop antenatal relationships too. It is also clear that not having the experience of pregnancy at all doesn't mean the later relationships are also compromised, or as those who have adopted a child or started a family through surrogacies arrangements know. Oxytocin, commonly heralded as the bonding hormone, is known to be released in large amounts during birth and breastfeeding to help regulate maternal bonding in mammals. However, less well known is that fathers experience rises in oxytocin equal to mothers as a result of interacting with their infants. There are, however, differences between mothers and fathers in the types of interaction that seems to produce these rises in oxytocin. For mothers, it is behaviors such as baby talk, staring into the baby's eyes, and affectionate touch. For fathers, playful touch and behavior such as moving their baby around or presenting objects seems to produce the rise in oxytocin levels. A huge problem when it comes to understanding the differences and the similarities between fathers and mothers is that most research on bonding doesn't directly compare the two. This is likely to be because mothers still stay at home with the child more often than fathers, and researchers might have difficulties finding enough households where fathers are in the role of a primary caregiver. So we don't really know whether fathers interacting with their babies differently to mothers is about their biological differences or about roles taken in relation to breadwinning and child rearing. But how good are fathers at understanding their child's needs compared to mothers? One study examined the ability of mothers and fathers to identify the cries of their own infant from those of others, and found that this was directly linked to the amount of time the parents spent with the baby rather than their sex. Other research has found that fathers' hormone levels seem to be affected by hearing infant cries, and that hormone levels influence the way in which they respond to the cries. We also know that while there are some subtle differences in the way that mothers and fathers show understanding of their infants' thoughts and motivation, the extent to which they do this is predictive of later security in the child's relationship with them. So although more research is needed, the evidence so far suggests that the argument that biological mothers have a greater bond than other parents is difficult to substantiate. Because factors like antinatal bonding, hormones, experiences, and even our own childhoods all interact together to influence the bonds between a parent and the child, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to try to pin the strength of these relationships on sex differences. What makes parent-child relationships work is complex, and we don't yet know all the answers, but being alert to a child's experience and understanding and responding to a child's needs in a sensitive manner seems a good place to start. Hmm. Hmm.
All right, it's quite an interesting article, I think.
Interesting.
Also,
Yes. Go ahead.
also, I'm sort of positively surprised that this is in the Daily Mail because it's sort of a just a well-written article, nothing, not, or at least not a lot of sensationalist stuff in there. I mean, the headline is a bit sensationalist, clickbaity, and so on, but the actual article is very good and even-handed, so I have to commend them for that.
Yeah, well, everyone does clickbaity titles. Even we do it on AVFM. Uh, you have to. I mean, I would have never read the article had it not been for the clickbaity title. so, so there's that. I mean, I have to admit, I fall for clickbait all the time, even though on some sources I just go through archive.es first. Not the case with the Daily Mail, but always the case on the Independent, because I'm punishing them for their stupidity. As for the article itself, yeah, very even-handed, very fair, in the sense that, look, this is the evidence that we've been able to find. That's what the research we examined says. We don't know all the answers. Whatever, just be nice with your children, and that's a good place to start, and we'll see where that goes, basically. Uh, as for the assertion in the title, uh, they admit they don't know, and I would like to see research on this. If you remember when we had Yil Ronen, who was supposed to lead AVFM Israel, now eventually AVFM in Hebrew, sorry. Eventually that project has fallen altogether because there simply weren't enough people to take care of it. But he said something very interesting on the show and also on his foundation website. I think it's called the Familists, if I remember correctly. He also said essentially the same thing. He was trying to get he had the funding, but he was trying to get the actual researchers to take that funding and use it to research whether such thing as maternal instinct even exists, and if it does, to what extent that is the case. As far as I know, last time I checked was 4 months ago, so unless something changed in the last 4 months, as far as I know, he was unable to find a researcher willing to at least ask that question. And that's probably because of, and I don't think feminism is at fault on this. It's rather more generalized gynocentrism. I mean, how dare you question whether mothers are superior at least until the age of 5 or something like that. That's what the basis for the tender years doctrine was.
Yeah, and I mean, basically what this article claims is probably the case is that those differences that do exist are not due to inherent biology, but just because mothers tend to spend more time with their children. That basically the amount of time you spend with your children is what's influencing how strong this maternal or paternal bond is, and not the sex of the parent.
Makes sense, but if I'm to do wild speculation, which I don't always do, bullshit, I always do. I would say it's a bit of both. I mean, it can't possibly be that biology has nothing whatsoever to do with it. Biology always has something to do with it. But it makes sense that the parent that spends most of the time with the child tends to have a deeper bond with that child. it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? At least on a commonsensical level, without actually being a researcher on the topic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously biology has a lot to do with it. The question is whether that biology, whether there's biological differences in that in that regard between men and women, between mothers and fathers. And it's obviously due to the different reproductive roles of men and women. It's a priori quite reasonable to suppose that that there would be such differences, and that mothers would have a closer connection to their children. So it's definitely something that that in the absence of evidence we should expect a somewhat closer connection of mothers to their children than fathers.
Or at the very least different.
Or the very least different. I mean, and they do claim in this article that there's some differences, like in how that closeness, that relationship is formed. Whether it's whether it's actually the case that mothers have this sort of innately stronger bond, I don't know. I think that's probably the case to some extent, but it is, I think, often exaggerated, and people sort of tend to overlook the role of fathers, because even just in terms of biology, humans are a species where males invest a lot of resources into their offspring, and it would just make sense for fathers also to have this close bond with their children. So I don't think that there is some sort of large innate biological difference there.
Let me throw something at you. I mean, I've been traveling quite a lot in various cultures radically different from each other, and what I've noticed is that there is no language, at least not that I know of. Maybe there is, maybe it's Zulu or something, although I think even in Zulu there is a separate expression for one mama's boy and the father's princess. The existence of such expressions, common used expressions in virtually all languages on Earth, tend to show these expressions didn't come up on their own. They've come up under hundreds or sometimes thousands of years of experience and observations. I know it's a stereotype. It obviously doesn't apply to everyone, but stereotypes exist for a reason. Is there the case? I don't know if it is, but given on the cultural observation alone, maybe there is a case that sons tend to be more attracted, more bonded, tend to form a more stronger bond with their mothers, and the daughters form a more stronger bond with their fathers, or the other way around. The fathers insist on forming a stronger bond with their daughters, and the mothers insist on forming a stronger bond with their sons. I don't know which is the case, but the existence of this stereotype, I think, should show something.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting, and it is actually the case that in terms of biology, due to the way how sex hormones work, fathers are slightly more related to their daughters than to their sons, and mothers slightly more related to their sons than to their daughters. So, in terms of evolutionary biology, that would be at least a partial explanation for that phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is, the social constructivists amongst us will say that, oh, it's just a stereotype and whatnot. But these kinds of tendencies have been observed for so long that it would be quite surprising if there is nothing biological behind it. As for the the concept of what the hell is the pronunciation?
Antinatal.
Antenatal. It sounds like anti as in anti against. Whatever.
Anti and anti, that's slightly different, the pronunciation.
Yeah, fair enough. This concept has been, I think I read in a very bizarre magazine, I think QZ.com or something like that. Harvard made a study that said that the fathers who spent the time of pregnancy with their spouses, whatever, girlfriends, wives, tend to have different hormonal levels than the fathers who don't spend the time at home with their spouses / girlfriends, whatever, and they spend that time, at work or somewhere else. Maybe that's the case. That's what makes the difference. Because let's face it, in most of the cases, the father is at work whilst the mother is pregnant. So that means they develop slightly less antenatal bonding, maybe.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, this sort of article calls into question how much of this antenatal bonding actually is real. Says that the evidence is conflicting and so on. Just because the evidence is conflicting, of course, doesn't mean that it's all a myth. It just means that we don't know anything clearly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
but
the reason they say it's conflicting is because they haven't been able to find enough households to subject themselves to such tests because the father is usually at work.
yeah, and of course, in the ancestral environment, that was not really the case. Maybe men were maybe out during the day hunting or something, but a lot of the time they were just with their families for most of the day. And even just going back into more recent history, if basically before industrialization, most men worked from their homes, and they spent a good part of the day with their children, often working together with them.
Mm-hmm.
So this sort of separation of home and workplace is a rather recent phenomenon for the most part.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
At least for sort of most of the population. Of course, there were uh, people who were say fishermen, or who would go out on the ocean during the day, or say soldiers out on campaigns or so on. But for most men, they worked in or near their home.
Yep. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, continuing on the parenting thing, let's get to the next one.
Okay, this one is from the BBC. The father saying, "Dads don't babysit." "Oh, it's so nice of you to babysit and give mom a break. I guess you got stuck with the kids today. You've got a good helper there." These are just some of the things that have been said to the dads who have been looking after their children, according to testimonies on Reddit, where the topic has sparked a flurry of conversation. It began when the user shared an image of a t-shirt bearing the slogan, "Dads don't babysit. It's called parenting." The man in the picture modeling the t-shirt is Al Ferguson from the Dad Network. He posted a picture of himself online a while ago wearing the t-shirt, but the image has resurfaced on Reddit and has got people talking about parenting stereotypes. "I've had people ask me, 'Are you looking after the kids today?' Or, 'I can tell you dressed the baby today,'" he told BBC Trending. "It's just out of date. The modern dad is more active in the family than they were historically. It's out of date to assume the mom is the primary caregiver." Although the number of dads who choose to stay at home and care for their children is on the rise, a 2014 study by the Pew Research Center showed that only 16% of primary caregivers are men. Over 3,000 people have responded to the suggestion that dads are only babysitting when they are, of course, parenting. Some dads shared their own experience on Reddit. "It hurt really bad when I was a new stay-at-home dad and people would ask about me babysitting. It really made me almost cry sometimes because it was like they couldn't see me as a caretaker," one user wrote. Others broadened the conversation to talk more generally about the sexism that dads experience. "Reminds me of all those ridiculous commercials when they make it seem like dads don't know how to take care of their kids while mom is away," said another Redditor. "They make a mess, kids go crazy, they don't know how to cook, clean, change a diaper. Where's all the outrage?" Another user wrote, "Single dad here. It's even worse when my 7-year-old wants to have a sleepover. I call the parents. I explain she wants to have a sleepover and your kid is invited. Then the awkward question, will mom be there? When you explain, no, and when you explain no mom here, sorry, there's that long pause. Sad to say that this day she still hasn't had a sleepover." Others disagree that it was sexist. "It goes the other way too. My husband will occasionally say that, 'You owe me for babysitting last Saturday. You are their father, you are parenting,'" one user posted. Al Ferguson says it's not just the language that contributes to the gender stereotypes. There are other barriers to equality that they're fighting, such as baby changing facilities typically being in the ladies' toilets. Now there are more working moms and more stay-at-home dads. There's been a cultural shift. I think that people need to move with the times.
You will have to excuse me if I fail to see the problem. Uh, Sorry, I just can't take this seriously. I mean, really, if that's the biggest problem of fathers, then I guess we won. We can move. We can go home. We can start doing only works on circumcision and things that really matter. Because obviously, the fathers' rights issue have been completely and utterly won over since the biggest problem on BBC trending on fathers is that some whiny nobody says babysitting instead of parenting. If that's the biggest problem, then we won. We can go home.
Yeah, but it's of course not the biggest problem. It's just
I don't think it's not even in the top 1,000.
yeah, but I mean it is at least I think a minor problem that people, and it's sort of a symptom of a bigger underlying problem, namely that people just don't value fathers nearly as much as they do mothers, and yeah, it's sort of a trivial thing being discussed here, but I do think there's a big problem with when with people or with men who are single dads or who are the primary caregivers, that there just is not a lot of societal recognition for that, and a lot of people view that with suspicion even, and it's something that people often look down upon, and I think that is a serious problem.
Okay, fair enough. But then again, even this article says, look, the number of fathers who are the sole caregiver or primary caregiver is on the rise. It's probably 4 or 5 times more than it used to be 10 years ago, but it's still around 16%. So, it's not really that common. So I can't blame the wider society not being completely up to date, up to speed, and aware of this when this thing is rather new. Let's face it, in some societies, British society notwithstanding, because and the Anglosphere in general, this hasn't been really that common until maybe 2000 or 2005. There was no fathers' rights movement before 2001 in the English-speaking world. Now, in the German-speaking world, things go a lot earlier than that. In Eastern Europe, also the first fathers movement dates back to 1991. So it's a little bit older. People are already more accustomed that there is such thing as single fathers, and no, they're not murderers or pedophiles. They're just single fathers. But these kinds of things, I think they usually solve by themselves as time goes on, and more people just get used to it.
Yeah, definitely. Though even under the sort of traditional model of the mother being the primary caregiver and the father being the primary breadwinner, I think it would still be inappropriate to talk about fathers babysitting. Because even a father who spends much of his day at work is still, parenting is still not babysitting them.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't disagree with that. What I'm saying is that it's not really uh, a big issue to go as popular as to reach BBC trending. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying the issue doesn't exist. I'm saying that if something about fathers is to go on BBC trending, it definitely should not be this one. That's what I'm saying essentially.
Yeah, I'm just glad that something about fathers is hitting BBC trending.
Oh, again, yeah. And I thought I'm the cynical one. Yeah, basically, I guess what irritates me is this language of the users they quote here. Now, I didn't click on the Reddit link, but I can bet without clicking on it that there are more pertinent answers there than the ones selected here that are uh, a little bit more on the whining side. Let's face it. I mean,
Yeah, especially that
uh,
one that says he's almost cried because people
yeah,
don't
come on.
respect him and so on.
Yeah, no. Or where is all the outrage? Oh, come on, are you serious? All the outrage because some dumb commercial says dumb things. You want outrage? Write to that company and tell that you won't buy their product because of their commercials. Believe it or not, these kinds of letter writing campaigns have solved a lot more than whining on Reddit. KFC, for instance, recently withdrew an offensive commercial displayed in Poland and Hungary. It was also about the father being completely incompetent and things like that. And not many people, something like 500 people out of a huge population. It's really not much. They've written to KFC and said, look, this is insane. And lo and behold, in a few days the commercial was gone. And these things can be done at a wider scale. I think that's a lot more productive than writing on Reddit or being quoted on BBC Trending. Oh my God, they're speaking in generalities. Well, there are commercials, but never say which commercial. I know they exist. You know they exist. Everyone knows they exist. But instead of general whining, rather targeting those particularly offending companies would be much more productive.
Yeah, definitely would be a lot more productive, but it's also a lot more work.
Yeah, right. Writing 10 lines and clicking send on the email. Yeah, it's a lot of work, definitely. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is from Germany, from Der Spiegel. Quote-unquote anti-gay article, convicted homosexuals to be compensated. According to an expertise by an expert in constitutional law, homosexual men who were convicted under the infamous Article 175 must be rehabilitated and compensated. Quote, the more than 50,000 victims had their human dignity violated in a major way, says Christine Lüders, who is in charge of the Federal Anti-Discrimination Office. Homosexual acts between men were illegal until 1994. The corresponding passage in the criminal law had been extremely controversial for decades. Eventually, Article 175 was removed, but the convictions were never overturned. The government cannot allow this injustice to persist, Lüders says. The expertise by Martin Burgi, an expert in the constitutional law from Munich, recommends the collective rehabilitation of all the men concerned through a revocation law. This would spare the victims from facing another humiliating violation of their privacy through a case-by-case review. Compensation is to be organized by a fund. The Federal Republic of Germany kept Article 175 of the Criminal Code, which had been sharpened by the National Socialists in 1935. Up until the law was made more lenient in 1969, an estimated 50,000 men received jail sentences ranging up to several years in many cases. After 1969, another 3,500 men were convicted. In the GDR, this law was repealed in 1968. Minister for Justice Heiko Maas welcomes the results of this expertise. Quote, the state incurred great guilt by making the lives of so many people more difficult, the SPD politician said in a statement. Article 175 was unconstitutional from the start. The old convictions are illegitimate. The human dignity of everyone convicted has been violated severely. These stains on the rule of law can never be wholly rectified, Maas continued, but we want to rehabilitate the victims. He therefore announced that his ministry would work out a bill for the revocation of the convictions obtained under the article and the resulting claims to compensation. Maas had announced his intentions of compensating the victims as far back as 2014. And I will skip the last paragraph because it doesn't add anything new.
Yeah, I remember watching a documentary about paragraph 175. I don't remember I think that the name of the documentary was Paragraph 175. It was made by a younger German gay man with interviews with gay men that were like 90 years old in 1998 or something like that. Compensation. Are even most of the victims of it even alive? I mean, 3,500 have been convicted since, what, 1969 until 1994. Probably 100 people or something like that are still alive now.
Probably a bit more than that, but...
Okay, let's say 1,000. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't think compensation is... I don't know. I mean, strictly from a constitutional law perspective, they have been convicted under the rule of law. Now, quashing their convictions and Expunging their records, absolutely fine, but compensation, I don't know what to say about that.
Basically, the argument is that that the law itself was always unconstitutional, and therefore the convictions were always illegitimate, and therefore and if you make that kind of argument, then you also have to compensate them for the wrongful imprisonment and so on.
Yes, but that would mean, again, how many times has the German constitution changed? I mean, in 1935, was it the same constitution as now? I don't think so.
1935? No, of course not.
Yeah, there you go. So to say that it was always unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional under the Grundgesetz, which went into effect in 49.
I see. So between 35 and 49, we're just gonna forget about it. And then between 49 and 68, or 69, when it was made more lenient.
It was already a while back, I think in 2002 or somewhere thereabouts, where they passed some sort of law compensating and rehabilitating people who were convicted under this paragraph and other laws during the Nazi time. So people from that period have already been rehabilitated. So it's about people who were convicted under this after that. And I mean, it's. I mean, if say were convicted under this paragraph in 1966, that's 50 years ago. If you were 20 back then, you're now 70. So it's actually, I think that's quite a lot of people still alive who were convicted under this law. So I don't think it's something that's just definitely too late because all the people are dead or anything like that. I think that quite a lot of them are still alive.
Okay, I guess that's a fair argument. Although, I don't know, I mean, how should I put it? These kinds of anti-gay laws have either been the product of a totalitarian regime or the product of their societies. Now, if they are the product of a totalitarian regime, such as was the case in Germany and in my own country, the communists brought it. Until then, there was no homosexuality was not illegal. The commies brought it. What's the point in punishing the current taxpayers, the current society, for the evils done by a regime so long time ago? I mean, if this had come in '91 or in 94, when the paragraph 175 was finally abolished, that would have made some sense. But now another generation has passed. So you, for instance, you're 30 or less. Why would you pay for a sentence that was passed down before you were born or when you were still in your diapers? It's just unfair. And fixing one unfairness by committing another unfairness just doesn't sound logical to me.
I don't know. I mean, it's obviously it's in some ways unfair that people like me have to pay for that. But on the other hand, it was an injustice done to some particular people by the German state, and these people, at least as far as they are still alive, I think do deserve compensation. Obviously, it would have been better if they had never been convicted in the first place, and you can make this sort of libertarian argument that no one else should have to pay for that for this law that was decided by people who are no longer even alive today. But we do have this state around that is acting as a legal entity, and from that perspective, this state has wronged these people and is therefore paying compensation. So that, I think, under that framework, makes a lot of sense.
I don't know. I mean, if I want to go even further to be, just against everything, I can say, well, why should the taxpayers in the former DDR pay? Because, they abolished their law their equivalent of paragraph 175 in what, 67 or 68, even this article
68.
68.
Yeah, though
So the overwhelming majority of the people living now in DDR and are born after 1968.
Yeah, they actually, when they abolished that paragraph, they replaced it with a new one that also banned homosexual acts between or with underage people, so people under the age of 18, as opposed to the normal age of consent of 14. So they still had some sort of law against homosexuality. Now, interestingly, in that case, it was actually also targeted at female homosexuality, which is sort of
Same
unusual.
here.
Usually,
Same here, yes. When commies brought, I mean, until 1967, there was nothing in the law mentioning homosexuality. In fact, in the 30s, before commies before World War II, there were even brothels for lesbians. Or some brothels would employ bisexual whores so they can serve lesbians as well. Then, of course, Stalin came around and Stalin said this is absolute degeneracy and shut down all of them. And then in 97, when Ceausescu rose to power, he proposed Article 200, it was here, which punished, again, both male homosexuality and female homosexuality. And after Ceausescu died in 95, I think, we hit the headlines, Romania hit the headlines because there was a lesbian couple in jail. And once their sentence expired or they obtained an early release, they went to the international press to complain about their conditions. Now, at first they were given some attention, but then their attention faded away because, once they got in here, the very tiny homosexual rights groups that existed back then in 95 say, well, wait a minute. Yes, what happened to that lesbian couple is awful, but let me take you through what happened with most of the gay couples, which weren't of women but of men. Was significantly worse than anything had happened to those two ladies. And then suddenly, oh, we're going to talk a lot about men now. We don't like that. And the international press left away. Nevertheless, 5 years. Actually, the law was de facto abolished in 97 when the Supreme Court said it's insane. But the Act of Parliament came in 4 years later, in 2001, I think. But from 97 onwards, there was no new conviction. And in 2001, when it was abolished, they essentially expunged everyone's records and whatnot. But compensation, that was never a discussion. And even now, the gay rights groups don't dare to ask that. If you ask the chief of the what's the name of the organization, ACCEPT, I think. If you ask him about that, he'll laugh at you and say, "Why? No compensation. Just leave us alone." So I don't know. I mean, whatever. We'll see how much that would go. I mean, does Germany have a law that says, for every day spent wrongly in jail, there's that amount of money, like some U.S. states have?
Yeah, like if you're found to be innocent of a crime, you were imprisoned, then you get, I think, something like, what is it? I think it's something like 15 euros per day, but from that they deduct some amount for lodging and board, so you actually get a lot less than that. Mm-hmm. It's actually a rather small sum of money, all things considered. So, but I don't know how much money they would get in this case. I don't know if it would be the same amount or more or less. I don't really know.
I see. Okay, let's get to the next one.
Okay, the next one is from the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Swearing for masculinity. On the internet, Werner Stahl is an egg. To be more precise, many colorful eggs. People who register at Twitter without uploading their own picture get an egg-shaped head with a colorful background as their user picture. Werner Stahl has registered at Twitter plenty of times, always as an egg. He doesn't want to share anything personal there, and he does not care for the exchange with other users. He uses Twitter to insult and offend. Every time Twitter deletes his account for this, he just creates a new one. Werner Stahl is a tweeting hydra with egg-shaped heads. Quote, "To me, it is a matter of self-defense," says the man who actually has a different name, but wishes to be called Werner Stahl in this text. It's a powerful masculine name, and you're not allowed to be a real man anywhere else these days. That's exactly what he's fighting against. He sees society as wimpish and feminized. Quote, gays, queers, and feminazis everywhere, Stahl says. Stahl is a particularly radical proponent of the self-styled men's rights advocates. They are convinced that the dictatorship of gender is systematically oppressing men. Skipping a bit here. Quote, these bulldykes hate anything masculine, Stahl says. Real men with hard muscles and hard dicks. But what they really need is a hard fuck. At least on the surface, Stahl's hard muscles are nowhere to be found. The massive man looks more like a placid bear. But even though bears may look cuddly, they are dangerous predators. And Stahl, too, has something of a predator's look. Quote, sometimes we have to make these things very explicit, he says. Otherwise, the slitted ones won't get it. And I'm skipping 3 more long, turgid paragraphs about this Werner Stahl person. People like Werner Stahl are a reason why masculinism is widely seen as a term of abuse. This in turn annoys people like Arne Hoffmann. On the telephone he sounds like the polar opposite of Stahl. He chooses his words with care, cites scientists, seems reasonable and friendly. Hoffmann describes himself as a left liberal men's rights activist, and he is one of the best known protagonists of the movement. Skipping another small bit here. Initially, Hoffmann is surprised that the pseudo deciding is willing to listen to him. This is, quote, like glasnost, he says, after decades in which the mainstream media only spoke with feminists. Then he explains what he is fighting for. There are 2 topics that are especially dear to my heart: discrimination against boys in school and men as victims of domestic violence. With his blog Genderama and several books with titles such as Save Our Sons, How the Future for Our Boys is Being Destroyed and What We Can Do About It, he wants to become a voice for men fighting for their rights. To him, feminists aren't the enemy. He even used to be one. Quote, I studied one of the humanities. There you are almost bound to become a feminist, he says. But the relationship is, quote, fraught with conflict, he says. When women published their experience with sexism during the Aufschrei debate, he and other men's rights activists were, quote, extremely annoyed that any discussion of female sexism, quote, were automatically brushed aside. And quite a bit of context, this article is, I think, the 9th article or something like that in a series about basically about feminism. All 8 of the previous articles were basically perfectly in line with feminist orthodoxy, and some people complained that they should also talk about men, and this article is the result of that.
A particularly hasty job, to say the least.
But
go ahead, please.
Maybe they've spent quite a bit of time looking for this Werner Stahl person. He's like it's basically a perfect subject for them, and of course.
Yeah.
Because I skipped like half of the stuff talking about this Werner Stahl person who might not even be a real person, but whatever. And then they devote only something like a third of the article to Arne Hoffmann, who is actually a serious men's rights activist, whereas this Werner Stahl person is no one anyone has ever heard of. I don't know if he's a complete fabrication, or if it's just some obscure person on Twitter with 100 followers or whatever. But he's definitely not anyone I have ever heard of, or that anyone I know of in the German men's rights community has heard of. So certainly not someone you want to interview and give such a broad platform to. If you were looking to do some honest journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I have a little bit over 100 followers on Twitter, so don't insult us, the small ones. Actually, I'm lying. I have 276 followers on Twitter, so I'm already a star. Joke aside, Yeah, maybe the Verurteilte character maybe is real. I mean, sounds like the trolls that we sometimes get on the IRC channel. And, you know, for most of the time we just kick them out outright, but sometimes we keep them around for fun because they provide very decent entertainment. If you have a thick skin. Now, if you're a thin-skinned feminist, then obviously that kind of people are horrible. Now, in all seriousness, I mean, I'm not a particular fan of Adi Hoffman for obvious reasons. I mean, comparing this with the Glasnost, a left liberal, yeah, okay, goodbye. So, you know, I'm not a particular fan of neither of the characters presented in the article. And also, there is, I'll dare to say it, there is some truth into what that troll is saying. I mean, we ourselves have presented articles from various countries of Europe on this show of people who genuinely despise anything masculine. And nobody seems to think that's a problem with it.
Yeah, definitely such people do exist, but I don't think that's necessarily the idea that this is something that is a society-wide problem or anything like that. No, people don't despise masculinity as such. They despise certain aspects of masculinity, and the thing is, people actually praise and revere many aspects of masculinity, but they never sort of dare to label them as being masculine. So we really like people who are competitive, who are really hardworking, who sacrifice a lot to achieve their goals, and these are masculine attributes. Not saying that no women have these, but it's mostly something that is found in men. And I mean, even the feminists are very much looking for these kinds of masculine values. They don't actually call them such, and they are basically always putting down or sort of diminishing the value of people who find fulfillment in traditionally female roles, whereas they are praising people, or at least women, who succeed doing these sort of traditionally masculine things. So I don't think that it's true at all that society hates everything masculine. In fact, I think it's more the opposite the case. It's just that
the labels have changed.
Just has sort of become taboo to label positive things as masculine and negative things as feminine.
Yeah, that's true. Also, by quoting this character, which again we should probably ask ourselves whether this character actually exists or not, but by quoting this character, I mean some of the things quoted there are things that are in common language in the non-feminist community, such as, for instance, the dictatorship of gender. That's actually the title of one of the most successful non-feminist books, The Dictatorship of Gender by Judge Serrano in Spain. So, you know, there comes some harm when putting such language into the mouth of trolls and whatnot. They really do harm the overall message. But then again, I guess that's the success of a defamation campaign. Put in, you know, 30% truth and 70% bollocks and print it.
Yeah, definitely there is definitely maybe 30% truth to what this Stahl character is saying. It's just that he's has lots of unreasonable things to say too, and uses this sort of really insulting language. I mean, talking about women as the slitted ones and so on. It's just like a caricature of what a reasonable person would say. It's like basically if basically sounds very much like he's a troll, who's just caricaturing men's rights.
Yeah, and not doing it particularly right. I mean, uh, I know the extreme corners of the non-feminist movement, and I have never heard anyone using such terminology. Uh, I mean, really, even if you go to the deepest depths of the abyss, where most of the people listening to ABFM content never go, and for good reason, we're the fluffy kitten face. But even if you go to the extreme lengths, to the extreme depths, sorry, of the abyss, you will not find such terminology, which is why I tend to agree with you that it's debatable whether this character is for real or not. I mean, even the most angry individuals who use the most colorful language and whatnot, even they don't speak like that. And that's one of the things that keeps me around the non-feminist sector. I mean, even the angriest, most extreme people in the sort of non-feminist and MRM whatever, even those people aren't misogynists. At best, they have a disdain for a significant chunk of women, but even they are not into the kill all women or whatnot. Even the most extreme sectors are still significantly saner than mainstream sectors of feminism.
Yeah, that's also a point that Anne Hoffman made during his interview, which they did not print in this article, that even the most extreme factions in the men's rights movement have never called for something like a genocide of all women or reducing women to 1/10 of the population or something like that. You
Yeah,
never hear that sort of language, but you do hear that in the extreme fringes of the feminist movement, and sometimes not even such extreme fringes. Sometimes people who are quite well respected have voiced such ridiculous opinions.
Well, Julie Bindel is as mainstream as you can get. I mean, she's a very respected feminist, and she's with the let's create a concentration camp for all men and let's have a truce on heterosexuality. That's her mainstream opinion. So I mean, can you imagine? I don't know, Janice Fiamengo saying such thing about women? I don't think so. Or or Paul Elam or Peter Lloyd, or I'm mentioning Peter Lloyd because he would be of a comparable status with Julie Bindel. I can't imagine hearing that from our own camp. I mean, even the extreme abysses of such as let's say the MGTOW forum, where you can find some dodgy content. Even there, you won't see that.
Yeah, I mean, the worst really is that you should just avoid women altogether and not have any contact with them. That's basically the most extreme opinion we'll hear there.
Yeah, and that's not it's an unusual opinion, but it's not necessarily extreme and definitely not violent. I mean, avoiding someone is as far as you can get from advocating violence.
Yeah, and you don't have an obligation, moral or legal or any otherwise, of interacting with people who don't want to.
Yeah, absolutely. It falls under freedom of association. Freedom of association actually does start with the freedom not to associate. Okay, let's get to the next one.
Okay, the next one is a short one, but it has a lot of insanity packed in a very short, a very compact frame. This one is from Emma, which is Ali Schwarz's magazine. Male Chauvinist of the Month, Christian Lindner, FDP leader. The Minister of Justice wants to ban sexist advertising. It's about time. Not just feminists have been demanding this for 40 years. No bill has been submitted so far, but one man is already objecting. FDP leader Christian Lindner, quote, Heiko Maas leads us further along the way to becoming a nanny state, a state which doesn't put any trust in its citizens and treats consumers like children, the 38-year-old grandiosely declared. His plans for banning nudity and sexualized advertising are the pinnacle of prudishness. People who object to sexist advertising should, quote, just refrain from buying, the smart liberal casually advised on Facebook. Apparently, the business consultant from Wermelskirchen has never heard of the power of images. Little wonder that only about 1 in 5 members of his party are female. and little wonder that he is married to a woman, Dagmar Rosenfeld, who climbs a journalistic career ladder from the Rheinische Post to Die Zeit with ritualized complaining about, quote, the black and white feminism of Grandmaster Alice Schwarzer. It really makes one wonder whether the FDP is actually looking for voters of any gender. And that last sentence was actually completely untranslatable because it was this sort of linguistic feminist insanity, and this last sentence is just a pale shadow of what the German original was. It's unfortunately not untranslatable.
Yeah, I don't get why such laws against sexist advertising should even exist in the first place, like at all. What's the problem? Who decides what's sexist and why?
Yeah, apparently the feminists do.
Yeah, why should the feminists? Why should the MRAs? Why should anyone have the power to decide what's sexist and what isn't? Why shouldn't the consumer who actually has his or her own money at stake?
Yeah, it's just the whole idea that displaying women's bodies in advertising is sexist against women is just really nonsensical. I mean, do these people also think that, say, people in ancient Athens were very, very misandrist because they displayed all these naked or little clad men with bulging muscles and so on, and really good physiques in their in their statues and on their pottery and so on. Does it mean that they hated and despised men? Is that the sort of argument you're making? That doesn't really seem to work. I mean, ancient Athens is a society where even I would say that it is quite misogynist. So I mean, this is sort of connection that to admire a particular sex's looks and physique and so on is sexism against that sex is just insane.
Yeah,
If anything, it's more the reverse.
Yeah, and I would go even further and say even if it is a particular ad or commercial or whatnot, even if it is obviously sexist, I still think it should be legally allowed. I mean, if it's really that unpopular as feminists claim, and they know that it's not really that unpopular, but if it is really that unpopular as feminists claim, then the market will fix it because most of the people will not buy that product and will disincentivize that particular ad campaign or even that product or even that company altogether if it's a small company.
Yeah, just as Lindner says, just refrain from buying if an ad offends you. It's very easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I really and that's not particularly a disease of feminists. I mean, it's a disease of Europe. Every single country in Europe, from Russia to Portugal, from Italy to Sweden, have these kinds of insane laws regarding advertising, not just with regards to sexism, but with regards to all sorts of things. In Russia, for instance, you have laws against advertising that could offend the church. And the standard for offending the church is so low that you can reasonably make the claim that if you have an advertising, I don't know, selling coffee cups with a cross on them offends the church. So it's essentially if the prosecutor hates you, then you're going to offend the church. In Italy, they have a similar ban against so-called sexist advertising, which essentially would de facto banned the entire fashion industry in Milano. Now, thankfully, in Milano it doesn't apply, but it applies in Rome, where essentially the designers are down to advertising their products within private property, because on the street they're no longer allowed to display any of their ads, no matter how tame they are, they're still too sexist for the sensibilities of the politicians in Rome. And I could go on like that. Not to mention Sweden. Sweden has an insane list of things that you cannot put in advertising. In addition to the fact that you cannot advertise at any given moment in time. In some time intervals during the day, advertising is forbidden because potato. So there's that, and not just on TV and radio. Sometimes, in some towns, even on the streets, you're not allowed to put in certain advertisements during the day or during the morning because actually,
So you have to take it down
yeah,
for part
pretty
of the day,
much.
or what?
Yeah, pretty much. They have these kinds of electronic
Okay.
billboards who have to do their best to schedule ads depending on what time is it. I know it's insane, but welcome to Sweden, and so on. I mean, I could go giving examples like that. In my own country, the automotive club had to pay like a 20,000 lei. That's like 5,000 and something euros a fine because they made a commercial encouraging seat belts, and because they mentioned that women have tits and therefore they need slightly longer seat belts. That was considered sexist, and they had to pull the ad and pay a fine for that. Nobody objected to it except for like 20 feminists, but for some reason that was deemed too offensive and had to be pulled. So yeah, I mean, this is a disease of Europe, trying to regulate these kinds of things. I mean, the FDP politician is absolutely correct. This is a nanny state mentality. It's this assumption that the consumers are so bloody stupid that the state needs to come in and say, look, you cannot see this, you have to only see this, and so on.
Yeah, and of course, in the way this law is going to be applied, it's not going to be about sexist advertising. It's about sexist advertising that perpetually offended feminists.
Oh, absolutely.
Of course, the vast majority of actual sexism in advertising is sexism against men, with men always being portrayed as bumbling fools and women as the smart people who actually know about the product being advertised and therefore can solve the problem that these stupid men have. That's sort of the standard pattern in advertising. Of course, that is not going to be outlawed.
Oh, absolutely not. And also not the commercials that depict naked men or scantily clad men, which they do exist and they're quite plentiful. And they never seem to offend anyone. But for some reason, the exact same kind of commercials that depict scantily clad women, there's a suddenly offensive.
Yep.
Very, very interesting. Okay, let's get to the last one. Oh, it's that one. The last one that is actually long, very, very long. Now, during the show, I've made some cutting in it, but it's still long. Anyway, the agony of being a 50-50 mom. Women once held the upper hand in custody battles. Now fathers are winning equal access and mothers are struggling to cope. Every mother lives for those small, joyful moments when her child masters something new. A book once too challenging, the telling of a joke previously stumbled over, a food devoured that had formerly been rejected. For it is in the gentle minutiae of a little one's life that you really see their budding personality grow. Imagine then the agonizing pain of being a privy into your child's life for only half of the time. The milestones missed, the lost cuddles before bedtime, the long nights spent wondering if they are sleeping sweetly or crying out for mommy. This is the reality for Britain's growing legion of 50-50 mothers who divide their time with their children equally with their exes. It's a growing phenomenon that, on the surface, might seem the fairest way for separated parents to organize their lives. But it comes at an emotional price for the mothers involved, and the consequences for children are as yet untold. Veronica Sweeney Bird is one such mother who wishes more than anything that her two little girls were having a more relaxed, stable childhood. Instead, every other Thursday she drops one off at nursery and one at primary school, full of foreboding as she kisses them goodbye. A week on, week off shared care arrangement with her ex-husband is the high price Veronica has to pay for her broken marriage. And 2 years on from the split, she still struggles to cope with the moment she says goodbye to her girls for 7 long days. I so hate being a 50-50 mother, says the 33-year-old bar worker from Tunbridge Wells who was married for 7 years. When it's not my week to have the children, I have to try to switch off from being a mom, and it's so very hard. To distract myself from the pain, I throw myself into work, working all the hours I can to keep me occupied. When they're not here, I daren't even go into the girls' room because just seeing all their clothes and toys is very painful. I know I'll just dissolve into tears and won't be able to function. Veronica only ventures into their room the night before they're due home to tidy up and get ready for their return. I know they're coming back, so I feel more excited than upset and can handle it, she says. Although her ex-husband lives just a 10-minute walk away, relations are strained and there is little contact between them apart from a court-ordered FaceTime conversation with her daughters, Ziva 5 and Tally 3, every other day while they are with him. Even that is hard because Ziva doesn't like talking on the phone and I can't force her, says Veronica. Although she trusts her ex-husband implicitly with the care of her girls, the lack of easy communication means she knows little of what they do in their time apart. More than this, decisions about their care are often made that are out of her control. I once went to pick the girls on my Thursday and was shocked to see that he had taken them to the hairdressers without telling me, says Veronica. Tally's hair had just grown long enough to tie into ponytails, and now it was too short to tie up. I was devastated. On Mother's Day this year, can you imagine the suffering? Yeah. On Mother's Day this year, Veronica wasn't even able to speak to the girls, as it didn't fall on her court-appointed FaceTime day, something she says she found utterly heartbreaking. Oh, can you give me a fucking break? And recently, her ex informed her that Ziva would be going to an after-school judo class every Wednesday, which encroaches on her own week with the girls. Ziva really enjoys it, so that's okay, says Veronica, but I don't like not being part of the discussion to decide what activities my own children are going to take part in. When you have children, you want to have a say in every element of their upbringing, but in my situation, that's impossible. Such emotionally grueling arrangements over childcare are becoming increasingly common. While official figures suggest that only 3% of separated parents share their children's time equally, experts say this is a gross underestimate because many arrangements are unofficial and so unrecorded. More and more couples are agreeing to split their care of their children without any intervention by the courts, according to Jane Roby, the Chief Executive Officer of National Family Mediation, an organization that conducts over 30,000 mediations a year between separating couples. 10 years ago, shared care wasn't really an option, says Jane. Now there is a cultural shift towards fathers taking an active role in their children's upbringing. So many men are saying they want to be involved in the day-to-day parental care. However, Jane warns that trying to be fair to both adults can be damaging for the children. It can be very hard for them as they have to live in different homes and move from place to place continually, and that can make them feel unsettled and unhappy. There may come a time when they just won't want to go, or they'll start playing one parent off against another. When deciding on arrangements post-split, all this has to be considered. Shared care has to work in favor of the child and has to focus on their needs, not just those of the parents. There are many potential permutations of shared care, some more difficult to bear for the mother than others. It can mean a 50-50 week-on, week-off arrangement like Veronica's, splitting the week with 3 or 4 days for each parent, or one parent having the children during the week and the other every weekend. Nicola Hewitt, who split from her 42-year-old police officer husband Dan in 2011 after 10 years of marriage, faces the trauma of being without her children, Devon 10 and Sunny 8, every weekend. Instead, she must make do with being a midweek parent. It made sense because my ex lives half an hour's drive away and wasn't near school, so the weekends work better all around, says Nicola, 42, an office manager from Kenley, Surrey. But I really miss the children being in the house. I miss putting them to bed and hearing Soddy play Say I Love You as I walk down the stairs. Skipping a bit. While Nicola knows her ex is a good father, there are often sticking points when it comes to their styles of parenting. I'm very outdoorsy, so the kids are often muddy and not in their best clothes, whereas he likes them to be ultra clean and dressed nicely, she says. I believe kids should be a bit grubby and fit. She is left to cope with the travails of the school and working week, whereas her partner gets to enjoy the more relaxed weekends. Keeping a bit again, Nicola believes the children have adjusted well to this setup and enjoy having 2 separate lives. But even after 2 years of having their mother only part-time, there are still signs of neediness. Sonny often plays up when he gets home from his father's after the weekend, she confesses, and is a lot more clingy and attention-seeking. It was this relentless focus on the child that Charlotte Dickinson tried to maintain when she separated from her partner of 10 years 12 months ago. Charlotte splits care of their 5-year-old daughter Jessica with her ex-partner who lives just over the road. He has her 3 nights of the week and Charlotte the remainder. It was a joint decision to split up and there was no animosity, so it made the shared care a lot easier, admits the 38-year-old teaching assistant from Cardiff. But it took time to adjust. On the days when Jessica was gone, the house was so quiet. In the middle of the night, she'd often crawl into my bed, and when she wasn't there, I struggled to sleep. Charlotte soon developed coping mechanism for the lonely nights with her little girl when her little girl was away. I ended up getting a cat, she said, as it was nice to have something else to come home to. And I started cooking meals for the freezer so I wouldn't have to cook when Jessica was here and could devote more of my time to her. I also took up running, going for a long run on each of the nights Jessica was with her dad and made arrangements with friends. Although they do differ in parenting style, I'm a soft touch while my ex is more disciplined, says Charlotte. She believes Jessica benefits from the continuity of contact with both her parents. It's very hard to be apart from her, but she loves her dad and enjoys spending time with both of us. She has 2 sets of toys and her own bedroom at both our places and seems to have adjusted well to the new setup. It is this maturity of attitude that more separated couples need to adopt, says Relate counselor Dennis Knowles, or children will undoubtedly suffer. As children grow up, they do become less needy of us, but in these shared care situations, the loss becomes acute from an early age. While it can be heartbreaking, you just have to make the most of the time you're with your child, see your time apart as time off, and use it to focus on your own interests. Eventually, we all feel the loss of our children as they grow up into teenagers and leave home, and we end up having to re-find our purpose aside from being parents. This is a chance to do that a little earlier. Veronica Sweeney Bird, though, is yet to adopt this sunny attitude. I know the girls have to see their dad, but at the end of the day, I'm a mother who has to somehow learn to stop being a mother for half of my time, she says. I'm not sure I can ever come to terms with that. I don't know many mothers who could. Wah, smirk.
So basically, dividing things up 50-50 is bad because it might hurt mother's feelings, and obviously we know that men don't have feelings, so we can't hurt those. So we should just have the children spend all the time with the mother and have the father pay for everything. It's obviously the best situation because
Absolutely.
it's in the best interest of the child, of course.
Absolutely. Now, Peter Lloyd has posted an article on the Daily Mail responding to this one. I'm going to link to it in the chat room. It's called The Agony, in the scare quotes, of being a 50-50 mothers. Oh, please. It's called Equality and Fathers Deserve Their Share Just as Much as Women. I won't read to it. It's a very decent article, something we would expect from Peter Lloyd. Peter Lloyd is a very fine man. He wrote for AVFM in the past and whatnot. But there is a point to be made that these kinds of separations, divorces, whatnot, they do, in some cases, or in most cases, I would argue, they do harm the children, and they do create sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller hazards within the parents' lives. But I don't think it hurts particularly women more. Uh, in fact, until this 50-50 thing started becoming a thing, it used to harm fathers a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, after separation of a long-term relationship, especially when there's children involved, suicide rate in men just takes a dramatic spike. It's just much, much higher than usual, and there's a lot of emotional pain that men go through when a relationship like that ends, especially if it's a marriage and there's children involved. And but of course that people just don't really look and they don't see that. And I mean, and that's of course you're right that splitting up usually tends to hurt children, but that's because of the divorce, not because of the 50-50 arrangement. All, as far as I know, all the studies that have been done on this show that this sort of 50-50 split is the least bad alternative.
Yeah. What many people don't seem to get is that there is no such thing as solutions, only trade-offs. And when a divorce occurs, there are a bunch of competing trade-offs. And yeah, the 50-50 one is usually the least bad trade-off. Usually, not always, but usually the least traumatizing trade-off. Now, the thing is, that's the portion that I really liked from the article. This counselor, usually when they cite counselors, it's usually feminist diatribe. Not this time. Maybe something is changing. But this counselor is essentially correct when he says that this maturity in attitude needs to be adopted more by the couples separating. And also mentioning the fact that a significant chunk of separation arrangements are made out of court and not using the state to mitigate or to mediate that particular topic. And that's a good thing. When I was in what is gymnasium would be called in Germany, but in English, I don't know how that is called.
Grammar school, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, I guess. Uh, at that time, divorce was completely unpopular, very rare. But we had a colleague, a girl whose parents were divorced, and I really admired her family in a way. I mean, unlike until I was 20, I've met exactly 3 people whose parents were divorced, and that's a lot. most most people my age haven't met anyone whose parents have been divorced until they were 30. The divorce was just really, really rare at that time. It's still rare now, but it was a lot more rare at that time. And I really admired their family because the father owned right after communism fell, opened a company and had a lot of work. And essentially, the girl would spend the holidays with her father, all the holidays, including the summer holiday, which was like 2 months and a half, and the rest of the time with the mother. Now, admittedly, the town was very small, so they could see each other whenever they pleased. But although it was an unequal arrangement, it was an arrangement that fit the child perfectly, fit her needs impeccably, fit her mother's needs, for her father's needs, and whatnot. Uh, and the thing that made it work was precisely because they refused court mediation when they divorced. They said, no, 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 we're going to fix this amongst ourselves, and we don't need the courts involved into that. So what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes 50-50 arrangement is not the best solution, but the best people to actually come up with an arrangement that works is usually those directly involved, as opposed to a court handing down an order. Because if we remember, every time we look at the cases presented by the Fathers' Rights movement, it's almost always cases decided by the courts and not cases decided as in the ex-husband discussing with the ex-wife, look, here's what can work and what cannot work.
Yeah, I think the court should only really step in once this sort of negotiation between the parents is broken down. If they can't come to some sort of amicable solution, then you need the courts to step in. But if at all possible, both parents should work that out among themselves, because it's just a lot more harmonious that way, and as usually both parents care a lot about the welfare of their child. So usually it should be possible to get to a reasonable solution.
Yeah, but until 2013, when Britain finally decided to make their courts less Kafkaesque and less secretive, that kind of thing was almost impossible. I mean, it was very, very rare to have settlements out of court. Most of the cases were decided by the secretive courts, and then you weren't even allowed to talk about it, thanks to gag orders and all the other Byzantine thing. you remember we read about that on
Mm-hmm.
our show when they finally decided to cut back a little bit from that
Yep.
type of system, and that's a good thing that they did. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, even the communists would still allow negotiations privately without the courts, and you would just sign up a paper and take it to the court and say, look, this is what we've decided amongst ourselves. This is the law from now on until I don't know, until the child is 18 or until something more serious intervenes. Even the commies allowed that, but certain countries in Europe don't allow that even now. Italy, for instance, still has a very secretive family court system like Britain used to have until 2013. And that's the biggest problem, a lot bigger problem than the fact that the mother's feelings are hurt by a 50-50 arrangement.
Yeah, and it's just insane. I mean, we already have the courts being overworked and having sort of a backlog of sorts of cases when it takes months or even years to get some sort of decision in a lot of cases. In that situation, why would you want to waste time on courts deciding things where no decision is actually necessary?
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, courts take time, they consume resources, and the more cases you put in front of a court, the longer it takes for everyone else until they reach a resolution. The sad part is, and I'm probably going to be accused of sounding like a traditionalist now, but the sad part is that these divorce cases, they're almost always messy. And I mean, a divorce is messy.
Oh my God, you sound like a traditionalist.
Yeah, I mean, what I would, it's very politically incorrect to suggest that now, but maybe, just maybe, in some cases, parents should probably try to avoid divorcing in the first place. Because from where I'm standing, unless it's violence involved or one of the spouses cheated upon the other, most of the rest of the things can actually be solved. I mean, if you've been married 10 years, and he hasn't cheated you, she hasn't cheated you, you don't beat each other up, all the others can be solved. I mean, if there cannot be irreconcilable differences, as the Roman law calls it, after 10 years. I mean, where were those differences 10 years ago?
I mean, the people do change, but I agree that in a lot of cases, people divorce for less than sound reasons. It's because I'm feeling somewhat unsatisfied and so on. Yeah, maybe, but if are you really going to be much more satisfied after divorce? Probably not in most cases.
Yes, and I is particularly, and again, I know I do sound like a traditionalist, but I don't care. I particularly treat with a lot of disdain, cases like, they have a 13 or a 14-year-old child and they divorce. And whenever I ask the parents, look, did he cheated on you or did she cheat on you? No. Did you beat each other up? Did she beat you? Did you beat her? No. Then why the fuck divorce now and not 4 years later when the child is 18 and things will be slightly less messy than they are now?
Yep.
I mean, I'm sorry to put it this way, but both the father and the mother should woman up and man up and take care of the child that they created. I mean, the child is innocent in most of these situations. And I agree with this mother who complains both about her feelings and about the fact that the child is a little bit affected by this change in setup. Yes, the child is affected, so why couldn't you, both of you, adult up and, avoid this happening to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, there are some cases where people don't love each other anymore. They don't particularly like each other even anymore, but they still stay together because for the sake of their children, and then they maybe get divorced once the children are grown up. I think that is very admirable, and that's, I think, what people should do if they can stand it at all.
Yeah, I have a neighbor in my former hometown who divorced his wife 10 years ago, I think. But because their house is huge, they essentially literally divided the house. in the sense, not physically, but he moved into the west side of the house and she moved into the east side of the house, but they still live in the same house. So for the sake of their children, actually, they have now the boy is 15 and the girl is 13, and they essentially said we'll sell the house when both of the kids are 18, and then we'll move on. But until then, they're staying there, so the kids have a common roof and a fruitful relationship with both of their parents. Yes, they cannot stand each other, but at the end of the day, that's what they told me. Look, we took a responsibility when we had these two children. Well, we have to take the responsibility till the end of it. And that's a much healthier attitude than this one. Oh my God, I feel unfulfilled in this marriage, so we're going to create a financial clusterfuck and an emotional clusterfuck for both ourselves and our children because I feel a little bit unsatisfied in this marriage. Really?
Yeah, I mean, at least from what it sounds in this article, none of these people like hate their ex-husbands, or they don't think that. I don't think in any of these cases there was some sort of abuse or something like going on. Probably just because they weren't really happy with their relationship anymore, and I just don't think that's really a good reason to get a divorce. Maybe if you get into a new relationship, then it's going to be really exciting in the beginning, and um, but then when you've been with this new partner for a year or two, probably also going to start feeling a bit unsatisfied, and it's no longer as exciting and so on. You're changing partners doesn't necessarily um, change your own feelings. Maybe the issue is not your partner, but yourself.
But yourself, yeah. Here's another thing that essentially I learned this. I mean, the first time it was told to me by my grandmother, uh, and then experience showed me that she was absolutely correct. When it comes to relationships or marriages, you have to expect at some point in time routine to settle in and value the companionship and the contentment you get with the other person. But I guess a significant chunk of people, mostly women, but also a significant chunk of men, don't no longer they're no longer being taught that in their families, and they don't know what to expect. And they expect that the thrill of the first 6 months of the relationship to last forever, which is rarely the case.
Yeah, and yeah, that's maybe it's also partly the media to blame, because when you read these sort of or watch these sort of love stories that are not just in, say, a romance novel or something, but also in basically all media that we consume, love and relationships are very central themes. It's very, very frequently just about these sort of first couple of weeks or months in a relationship. Um, the sort of longer relationship with people who've been together for 10 years, 20 years, even longer than that, is not really a common theme in fiction. And maybe that's sort of a problem, that we're constantly bombarded with these fictional depictions of um, romantic relationships in their beginning stages, and you sort of expect to find that in your own life too, but it's not something that can be found as easily, and it's not something that really lasts usually.
Yeah, I mean, how should I put it? Relationships are commenced by chemistry, but they're continued by brains, essentially. I mean, that kind of adolescenting thing that creates the attraction at first fades off fairly quickly, 6 months, maybe a year. Uh, what's over 1 year, it's usually brains on both parts, people being adults and understanding, look, these are our needs, these are our problems, let's see how we can solve them so we can keep this thing going. uh, Sadly, when I look at even people my age, but particularly younger than me, I no longer see this. People older than me, almost all of them tend to know this, but the younger generation just doesn't seem to know it. And I don't know how to. I don't know. I don't even know how to transmit it, let alone how to teach it to younger people.
And I guess a lot of people just have too high expectations.
Yeah,
Because people always talk about settling for someone as this very negative thing, and that's something that the losers do. But it is no, it really is something that grown-ups do.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, look,
No, you're
I'm a,
not going to have the most awesomest partner ever, who's more attractive than anyone else and smarter than all the other men or women that you see on television. But if you have someone who's pretty good, that's still probably good enough.
yeah. It's this thing of delayed gratification, because after 1 year, routine settles in, and some of the nice things of long-term relationships or marriages. So, I'm not married to my girlfriend, but we've been together like what, 8 years now. Uh, some of the things of the goodies of long-term relationships, you get to enjoy them at 4 years into relationship or 5 years into relationship, when you discover the contentment of companionship, I guess I would call it. I hope it makes sense in English.
It does, yes.
uh, and these are the kinds of things that aren't even preached about. I mean, even and that's why I don't like conservative preaching about family, because they don't preach the important stuff either. I mean, when it comes to long-term marriages and whatnot, they go full religious on you when they should actually go on these kinds of aspects. That it's the little things that make great things shine. And these kinds of things are no longer being preached at all, neither by the media aimed at young people, neither by the parents. Very few people preach that anymore in any way. And I guess I can say that's because it's no longer hip. I mean, for in the age of instant gratification, how do you explain that some of the things nice about your long relationship will come 5 years from now? To most young people, 5 years sounds like an eternity.
Yeah, I don't have any answer to that. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to find the answer myself, because these kinds of things need to be preached somehow. I'm not particularly alarmist like most conservatives. Oh my God, the institution of family and whatnot. No, people will form families eventually, even if they form them later in life. But the expectations part has changed too dramatically, and not for the better.
Yeah, and I do think that there's too much emphasis on this love component. When a lot of previous societies, people by and large did not marry for love. They just married because for economic reasons, as a matter of convenience, of having this sort of shared household that's much more efficient than two people living on their own. And the family used to be a unit of economic production,
Hmm.
not just a sort of thing that you come back to at the end of a working day.
Hmm.
Um, and this has sort of shifted more and more towards this idea of finding your soulmates. And um, then when it turns out the person you married to is not actually your soulmate, then you feel cheated. You feel like there's someone better out there. And often it can just sort of this idea of keeping your options open and looking out for someone better that can uh, spoil the kind of satisfaction you can get from the person you're actually with. And
I
I
guess
think
the
that having
grass is always greener on the other side.
yeah, I mean, I guess in a society where divorce is um, not something that people usually do, it's just uh, you just find a way of working out the differences in most cases, and usually that is possible. Whereas in a society where divorce is a sort of very normal thing, people often just flee at the first sign of serious difficulties.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I guess we can finish with that. At least I don't have anything further to add. 94 minutes. Damn, we're getting more and more efficient.
Yep. I do just have one last addition, one last thing I want to say, and that is that you should consider taking the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.